Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. Welcome in, huddle up. We're about to get into, where the Falcons basically sit after 2 weeks of this 2025 regular season, coming off a big win on Sunday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to dig into a little bit of the numbers, kind of obviously what they've done so far this season, what they did in this week 2 game against the Minnesota Vikings, and then kind of how they compare at this point and how they project. And I know it's only 2 games, and there's lots of caveats, and we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff. But just kind of like how they're different, basically, than what this team was last season. And obviously, on the defensive side of the football, as you can imagine, there are quite a few differences as to what this team is doing. And so we're going to get into all of that in just a little bit. Before we get into it, though, I did just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. You can follow this show if you're listening to us on podcast form on Joe Patrick on Football. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel at 929 The Game. That's where you can catch all these episodes in video form, which can be useful sometimes. We do, from time to time, put up some graphics, or if you just want to see my ugly mug, that's where you can find it. And if you are watching this on YouTube and you would like to have an audio version that you can take with you in the car or whatever, just search Joe Patrick on Football on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow me on X at JAPatrick200, also on Instagram, same handle. And obviously follow the station, especially on game days where we've got you covered. As Chris Thomas would say, from pillar to post. That's kind of his his catchphrase that he uses a lot. But we've got everything. I'm on with Andy Bunker on the Wade Ford Tailgate Show. That's usually what kicks off our Falcons coverage for the day. That's basically from 4 hours to 2 hours before kickoff. That leads us into, obviously, the pregame show. And then you've got Wes and Dave on the call for the game, with Mike Johnson and Grant McCauley on at halftime and postgame, and then Chris Thomas, as I mentioned, has got you covered for the reaction call-in show on the Falcons flyover after the games, and hopefully we get more days like we had on Sunday, because that was beautiful to go into an incredibly hostile environment. I felt like it was loud just through the TV. That Minnesota crowd, no one seems to get louder, and then obviously it's never gets louder, hardly ever gets louder than a season opener at when those fans are going for their first game of the season for a primetime game. Very, very difficult environment to go into, especially for an inexperienced quarterback like Michael Penix Jr. Or, he is quite experienced at this point in terms of just the amount of football games he's played at the college level and the pros and dealing with that kind of noise, but to lead that team into that environment, making his 5th NFL start, very, very impressive what he did. But let's get into some of the numbers, because we are seeing some differences in what this team is showing so far this season compared to what they have been. And let's start on the offensive side of the football, where, interestingly, in this particular game, we saw more 12 personnel happening from Zach Robinson in week 1 at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But when the team got down in that second half, they had to go to more of a passing attack. They had to go to more of an air raid kind of situation. And we saw them kind of spread it out a little bit more, like they tended to do almost all of last year, where they were in 11 personnel, I believe, more than any other team in the NFL. If not first, then probably second or third. But I think they were in it 90+% of the time last year, with Kyle Pitts, notably, basically as an inline tight end very, very often in that setup. And that has not been the case so far this year, and I think that speaks probably to the fact that Zach Robinson feels more comfortable putting Kyle Pitts in some different positions on the field, splitting him out. We saw that happen against Minnesota on Sunday, catching a slant from out wide. But overall, Zach Robinson used 12 personnel, that's 2 tight end sets, on 55 of the Falcons' 63 plays. That's 87% of the team's plays were in 12 personnel, which is something that Arthur Smith would be proud of. He ran 12 personnel with the Falcons more than any team in the league. And I think it probably speaks to the fact that they wanted Charlie Warner in there quite a bit to get this run game going, which they really needed to do after the running backs only ran for 48 combined yards in week 1. And then obviously they come out against Minnesota and run for over 200 yards between those two backs. A really, really impressive showing from them. And that leads into our next stat, which is Bijan Robinson. Bijan, by the way, we can say now. I've always called him Bijan, but now we can call him Bijan. If you really know Bijan, you just call him B. That's the if you guys really want the insight, just call him B. That's what all his teammates call him. But Bijan Robinson ran for what was it? 100. He had 168 total yards of offense, I believe, in the game. 9 forced missed tackles in this game for 42 added projected yards. That is quite a lot. That is a lot of forced missed tackles in a game. In fact, just to go into what he's done in that respect so far this season, he's generated 15 missed tackle or forced missed tackles. That ranks him first in the NFL. I believe, I forget who's in second, but he's got 15. Second place has 10 so far through 2 games. And Bijan only had 69 last year. I say only 69. He ranked 4th in the NFL last year with 69 forced missed tackles. To have 15 already through 2 games, I mean, it just shows how phenomenal he is, how agile he is, the anticipation that he has to put defenders on their wrong foot and to keep them off balance at the point of attack when they're trying to make tackles is remarkable. He is on pace. Those 15 forced missed tackles would put him on pace to have 135 forced missed tackles this year. For context, Derrick Henry led the NFL last year by far with 87 forced missed tackles. So I'm not saying that Bijan's going to have 135. I don't think that is a fair projection to have. But I think that the reason I put those stats out there is just to put in context just how impressive he is. And Bijan had one of the best, rushing years last year in recent NFL history. Just when you look at his success rate, obviously I know that Saquon Barkley kind of was the standout in terms of rushing for the 2,000 yards and everything. But what Bijan was doing with what he had available to him in terms of the scheme and whatnot, he was as impressive. And we saw, if you were watching the broadcast, they cut away to Saquon kind of gushing about Bijan in his interview that he did for the NFL 100 list. And you can clearly see that Bijan has the NFL's respect and the respect of some of the top backs in the league like Saquon Barkley, who couldn't have spoken more highly about him. So a great day from him, great night from him, and obviously the Falcons will hope to get more of that as they go on. Well, it's interesting to note that when we talked to Chris Lindstrom yesterday, because I asked him if he had kind of seen Bijan and to just kind of gush about just how impressive he is when you look back at it on tape. Some of those moments where he's just squirming through a pile of bodies. I liked how Brian Baldinger said it's like smoke through a keyhole. It's kind of amazing that he gets out of some of these situations. Or was that one where he was kind of using an opponent to kind of lay on top of to keep his knees off the ground, where he picked up some extra yards. But Chris Lindstrom said for him it's almost just as impressive what Tyler Algier does, but less than like what he does spectacularly with his athletic gifts, and more of just how he runs the ball, the way that, frankly, the ball is supposed to be run. It's not to say that Bijan obviously does it wrong. Bijan is incredible. But he just talked about the way that Tyler, stays on his tracks and reads his tracks well to get the most out of what the offensive line is opening up for him is really impressive. And so for the Falcons to have 2 backs like that, I mean, that is what every NFL team hopes to have. And if they can continue to get that kind of run blocking, then I think that they're going to have a lot more success, and that's just going to make life easier on Michael Penix, on these receivers, on Pitts, to have more opportunities on everybody. Everybody's going to be eaten if the running attack can get going, even close to what they did Sunday night against the Vikings. Also, one last one on the offense, as this kind of just continues a trend, but just kind of pointing it out. They were in pistol just over 50% of the snaps last night, and the note here is that Atlanta has used of the 6 most pistol-heavy games that any NFL team has run since Zach Robinson took over to start last year. The Falcons have owned 5 of those games as the team with the most pistol usage in a game. So 5 of the 6 most pistol-heavy games have been from Zach Robinson's Falcons, and that's, I guess, why he calls it a pistol offense. And again, I don't expect them to go away from that too much. I do think, from what I recall, they were under center a little bit more. Obviously, they get that jump. They get Minnesota to jump late in the game with Michael Penix under center. They ran a little fullback dive with Tyler Algier under center. So there were some more under center than what we saw against Tampa Bay in Week 1, but still, I wouldn't expect much different than what we've seen so far this season. Oh, one last thing about, I don't have the immediate stat pulled up in front of me, but the Falcons, we talked about them using the heavy 12 personnel, but they also used 11 personnel on only like something like 8 plays in this game, which is like pretty interesting. I only think of it because I think that about how much they used 12 personnel, which was almost every play, and then they even featured 21 personnel at times, again using that fullback dive. So pretty interesting to see that kind of shift away from what Zach Robinson has tended to use. And I know a lot of fans probably want him to shift away from the pistol in some respects, but I don't think it's not that bad. I think that it maybe isn't optimal in some instances, like when we've talked about it before on the podcast and some of the short down and distances. But it seems like, in those instances, they were getting under center more in this game. So that was good to see. Now, shifting over to the defense, this is where it gets really good. So, and this will be, so gratifying for Falcons fans to hear, especially after, the lengths the team went, especially in the draft, obviously, to improve this side of the ball, to improve the pass rush, to make themselves more dynamic on defense. They generated 53.3%, or they had a pressure rate of 53.3% in this game against the Vikings. That is the highest pressure rate a Falcons team has had since Week 15 of the 2018 season. Just to put more numbers to this, 6 players on this Falcons defense recorded 3 or more pressures in the game. And the Falcons blitzed on 43% of Minnesota's dropbacks, which is a departure from what Jeff Ulbrich has done. And he spoke about this. I can't remember if he spoke about it on the broadcast at some point, or if this was during training camp, or I'm not during training camp, but during the practice week. But he's spoken about the fact that he's always been a very like 4-rusher kind of guy. He wants to be protected in the secondary, and so it's interesting to see him go away and bringing some more rushers, and to great effect. With you get the pressure rate based on the amount of blitzing that they were doing, which was great. And then just to kind of wrap it up overall, what this Falcons defense is so far this season, they are 4th in pressure rate overall. They're maybe most notably, they are 5th best in the NFL in EPA per pass at -0.26. And they're 4th in yards per pass play against, basically, so 4th best in yards per pass play against. But that EPA per pass is an interesting one. I know getting into these like advanced analytics is kind of, it can go right over people's heads, including my head. I'm not a super advanced analytics guy, but this EPA per play / EPA per pass, there's a notable stat that Ben Johnson, the current Bears head coach and former Lions offensive coordinator, brought up at owners meetings this week, earlier this spring, which was that the team with the higher EPA per pass, the team with the higher passing EPA in a given game is going to win that game 80% of the time. And that tells you just how much of a passing league it is and how much of a quarterback-driven league it is, because the EPA per pass doesn't really matter about how many yards you're throwing for, whatever. It just matters more about your effectiveness, and especially in certain situations. And that's where the Falcons are doing really well so far this season, in limiting that effectiveness against their opponents. They're also, when we talk about getting into the quarterback, they're 7th in sacks. That's 5th in the NFL, 4th in sack rate in the NFL, 5th overall in EPA per play. I mean, it's just really, really good on that side of the ball. And you saw it. You saw it. I don't have to explain why this team is so much better than what they've been if you've watched this team really over the last 2 seasons. And I think it's no mistake that Jeff Ulbrich gets a game ball from Raheem Morris in that locker room. If you saw the locker room video, the celebration video that the Falcons posted after that win, Ulbrich got a game ball from Raheem Morris. And I think partially for the scheme and the difference, and I think that that's a big reason why the Falcons are having so much success. But I also think it's just, the way that he's got these guys playing, which is just so aggressive. And there's one more stat I'm going to throw out at you, and I don't want people to take this with too purely because it's a stat that is. How do you say it? It really is on the fine edges, but the team's get off rate, it's like literally how quick you're getting out of your stance and getting off the line of scrimmage. They're 4th best in the NFL so far this season. Last year they were the 5th worst. And it's not to necessarily say that get off rate is good or bad, but I do think that that improvement speaks to what Nate Ollie and what Jeff Ulbrich want this defense to be, which is just kind of like a hair on fire, dynamic, getting in the backfield, causing mayhem. That might open themselves up to some big plays. We saw it, and it's always kind of embarrassing when that happens, but it happened at the end of that first half where J.J. McCarthy is able to connect with Justin Jefferson in a situation where you didn't think that Minnesota was going to be able to score points before the end of that half with where they were on the drive and what J.J. McCarthy was doing at that point in the game. But they give up a big play, and that's going to happen when you play in this style. But the other side of that coin is everything that we just talked about with what this team is doing in terms of getting to the quarterback, making these big plays. And we haven't even talked about the turnovers, the fact that you've got two rookies that you drafted in the third and fourth round in Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman Jr., each coming up with interceptions. Billy Bowman could have come up with nearly came up with two interceptions. And his interception that he had was really, really impressive. The way he broke on an out route and just undercut that ball. I mean, that is some impressive stuff. The quickness to get out of his back pedal like that is exactly what you hope to see out of a nickel. And he also brings obviously a physicality in the run game where this team has not been bad in the run. I thought that they were going to be a little bit vulnerable, particularly in this game against the Vikings, because you've got a two-headed monster there in Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason. And in particular, I was worried about Jordan Mason, just kind of, pounding through this maybe lighter weight defensive front that the Falcons have because they're so geared towards rushing the passer. And no, like we talked about it on the instant reaction show, but I credited Divine Diablo at the time. But you could, any number of players are doing a great job of sticking their hats in there. But anyways, back to Bowman. I mean, just incredible what he did on that play, and just generally in the game. He did get burned once. He didn't get punished for it. It was an overthrow by McCarthy, but overall, I think what we're seeing from Billy Bowman 2 games into his career is really, really promising. And same with Xavier Watts. I mean, he could have had multiple interceptions in week 1. Obviously didn't, and that hurt the team, but he comes back. He has a game-sealing interception. Not a well-thrown ball by J.J. McCarthy, it must be said, but Xavier Watts made the play on the ball that could be made. I do want, I feel like, speaking of that, I hate to be that guy. I hate to be the guy, but I do, after all these glowing things that we've talked about this defense being so far this season, I think you can't not mention the fact that they have been going up against some offensive lines that are a little shaky. Tristan Wirfs being out for the Tampa Bay Bucks in week 1, that caused an offensive line reshuffle where they moved basically they had 3 guys playing in different positions because of that one injury. And then in this game against Minnesota, Christian Darrisaw, their best left tackle, is their best offensive lineman, also out. They don't do the reshuffle, but clearly James Pierce was having success in that game. Well, all the Falcons pass rushers were having success in that game. Jalen Walker gets his first sack of the season. A really quick win on that left tackle. I forget his name. I think it was Skule. Skule, I believe. And then he leaves the game also, so they were really depleted. I believe there was one other offensive lineman that may have been out for them. So it was a banged-up offensive line for Minnesota. And then also, frankly, maybe this is just my opinion, I've just never believed in J.J. McCarthy. I thought that it was not surprising how poorly he played in that week 2 in week 2 on Sunday night against the Falcons. I mean, I wasn't surprised with how he was playing week 1 until, the comeback, which I give more credit to Kevin O'Connell and kind of being able to dial up some relatively easy reads for McCarthy and even some stuff on the ground for him to use his legs where he's really strong. And so I think it's worth noting that there have been some fortuitous kind of breaks in terms of the way that the injury situations have gone that have favored the Falcons. And it's not to take away, you can only beat the opponent that's in front of you. So these stats are, legitimate. I don't want to take anything away from them, but I'm a little bit skeptical that these will be able to continue as the season progresses. But having said that, they're going up against the Panthers next week, and they have issues on their offensive line. They had 2 offensive linemen go on IR yesterday. So I think the Falcons are going to likely keep up this kind of havoc on the defensive side of the football and give themselves obviously a great chance to win if they do. So it's been really, really impressive from this Falcons defense. And I think even the statistics aside and the opponents aside, just generally what we're seeing from the defense player for player, just in terms of the athleticism that you have at these positions, the interchangeability that you have with a player like Jalen Walker, who I think we are already starting to see a little bit of the versatility. There was that play where the Falcons only had 10 men on the field on defense that they pinpointed on the broadcast, but Jalen Walker was lined up over the guard on that play, and I do wonder if they might try to bump him on toward the inside on some pass rushing downs, and they could even have him drop off into coverage from that position to try to do some simulated blitzes or whatever, but I think that we could see some of that versatility start to take shape. I know that Jeff Ulbrich, when he was first drafted, was asked about this by us in the media, and he said he wanted him to master the edge position. And I took that at the time as saying, like, okay, well, he's just going to play edge. He's going to be a full-time edge his rookie year, and that's that. And then, if he progresses from there, then he will. But I think that maybe that was just more of a, like, we're going to train him as an edge throughout this summer, throughout training camp, but maybe we are going to start to see some of that versatility be used as the season progresses here. And I think that the Falcons would probably be wise to do that because he is obviously a very versatile player, and great to see him get a sack. James Pierce Jr. gets half a sack. I thought he could have been credited for a full sack on that one. We talked about it earlier with 6 players recording 3 or more pressures. Just felt like it was a different player's turn on almost every play of getting into the backfield, but especially these rookies and the second-year players are really, really looking good at this point in time. There was a lot of questions about Ruka, for example, as to how he was going to deal with, coming in being pretty much a starter for this team, having not really played hardly at all, much at all, his rookie year, and he looks great. I think he looks dynamic. He's stout enough, I think, against the run with what we've seen so far. Just really impressive. And I've been reflecting on just, how criticized the Falcons were during the draft when they made these moves. Obviously, it was a big move to trade away next year's first-round pick to go get a player like James Pierce Jr. But I think the Falcons had to do that. They didn't, because of the Kirk Cousins situation, they just didn't have as much cap flexibility as you would like to have and to be able to go out in the free agent market and get some of these players. So the Falcons did what they could to make themselves as potent of a defense as possible heading into this season, and I think that it's paying off. I think that you're seeing, especially these edge rushers, you're seeing an athleticism that was desperately needed, and an ability to get into the backfield and create some of these situations that maybe makes it easier on some of your playmakers in the secondary to go make plays. And then what I think gets overlooked the most by the pundits about what happened with the Falcons in that draft is the fact that the Falcons got that 3rd-round pick back in that trade in the current draft and then go and get Xavier Watts. That was huge. It wasn't that pick that they drafted Xavier Watts with. They traded up again slightly to go get Watts to make sure they got him, but they got their guy. And man, he looks like a guy that could have been drafted in the 2nd round or higher. He's looked at that good so far this season. So I think really impressive work. So far, you've got to hand it to Terry Fontenot for making the most out of what he had available to him. And even when you say it's like, oh, well, the Kirk Cousins, this was all done because the Kirk Cousins situation was messed up. I mean, he also went out in that draft and did the unconventional thing of drafting Michael Penix. That now looks like an absolute slam dunk of a pick, despite it being so incredibly controversial at the moment. Because what you look at Michael Penix and what he was able to do, it's not like he had to do a lot, in this particular game, but still, I thought that the way he handled that Minnesota crowd, and obviously did not get off to a great start with the team having to take a timeout. There was a delay of game, and the team bogged down in the red zone. They got to get some of these things cleaned up. I'm not saying it was a perfect game by any means from Penix or anybody on the offense, maybe outside of Bijan Robinson, but still, just like the poise that he had in being able to lead that offense, I thought was impressive. The team was still able to move the ball effectively. Again, it wasn't necessarily through his arm, but just generally impressed with the way he led the team in a situation that was never going to be perfect. You have to expect when you're going into an environment like that, you're always going to face some adversity in terms of taking some penalties you don't want to, whether that's false start, guys jumping offside because they can't hear the snap or whatever it might be. And so I just thought it was really impressive. The other thing that I think he just does not get credit for, that he seemed to have been criticized from day one on, that I never felt like held a ton of water, was him just kind of being this like very confined to the pocket passer. Um, the I would encourage everybody to go back and find that pass that he throws to Drake London where Drake ultimately fumbles on the play. Incredible. Like rolling out to his right, which it would be like for a normal quarterback rolling out to their left, so they've got to really turn their shoulders around to try to get angled on that throw. So he's rolling out, he turns the shoulders and changes that arm slot down a little bit and puts the ball perfectly on Drake London away from his own defender. I think it just shows, that special ability that he's got. And if he can do that and he can present that threat, and he makes it harder to rush him because he also has the legs to get out of there and do that kind of thing, he's going to be so hard to deal with. And he's just in his fifth start. I remind everybody that he's still so early in his career. I don't know. I feel like he's not talked about that way. I feel like he's not talked about as a young quarterback the way that a Bo Nix is talked about, or frankly, J.J. McCarthy's talked about. I mean, J.J. McCarthy's talked about like, oh, you got to give him all this grace. Well, I mean, J.J. McCarthy's making his second start. Michael Penix is making his fifth start. Like, what's the actual difference between that? In Michael Penix's second start, by the way, he was leading the team on 2-minute drives down the field against the Washington Commanders in a Sunday night primetime game when they had a chance to clinch a playoff berth, which they ultimately did, but Michael Penix put them in position to win that game at the end of the game. If they had Parker Romo in that game, they probably win that game. And instead, their backup kicker, his 56-yard field goal lands 10 yards short of the goalpost. But anyway, even with what Michael Penix has showed, I still feel like he's maybe not really getting the love compared to some of these other rookie quarterbacks that were drafted, especially in his class, that he's getting. Especially considering, there's the whole Caleb Williams situation, the first quarterback drafted in that class, the quarterback that you couldn't criticize. If you criticized him on social media, which nobody really did, because I think there was almost like, there was such groupthink that I think it almost I'll just speak for myself. Like I always felt like there were some major red flags with Caleb Williams, but I didn't want to put them out there. One, because I'm not a draft guru. One, I'm not like looking at a ton of tape. The Falcons, two, the Falcons were never going to get Caleb Williams. I mean, the Bears were pretty much locked into him the entire time. But I felt like you didn't really see any criticisms of Caleb because there was going to be like a social media mob or something that would come down on you, telling you how stupid you were if you did that at the time. And I think we're seeing some of those concerns come to fruition. And I believe it's been reported probably by Josh Kendall in The Athletic, if not by more, maybe somebody on ESPN. But I know that I can say, I've been told independently by sources inside the Falcons building that they had Michael Penix as the number 2 quarterback on their board ahead of Caleb Williams in that draft, with Jaden Daniels being the number 1 quarterback on the board and Penix being number 2. So, credit to Terry Fontenot for frankly trusting his gut, and not that he was facing the mob and like what we were talking about with Caleb Williams, but he certainly did face a mob for the reaction that came from making that pick. And yes, like while you can maybe make some criticisms of the move to get Kirk Cousins, I still think that the time for Michael Penix to sit and learn from him was helpful and is allowing him to be the quarterback that he is at this point in time, especially coming into a situation just like this. Not in terms of the throwing ability, that Kirk Cousins isn't helping him throw the ball any further or more accurately, but I think he has helped Michael Penix learn how to prepare, obviously learn the offense. He got some time to just sit and like learn Zach Robinson's offense a little bit, and I think that all these things are paying dividends for the Falcons at this point in time. So that's a lot. One last thing just about the kicking situation, which I know people still have questions about. Raheem Morris kind of was chuckling to myself when he said that he's Romo's 90% the kicker this week, or 90% likely to be the team's kicker, and openly saying that it's not a competition at this point in time. If it's not a competition, why the 90%? Why the 100%? It's like the you gotta have an act of God clause in there, in case something happens. But, I think part of that is just not wanting to get ahead of the team in terms of transactions and, maybe even if they want to like do a little something for Koo if and when he gets released, in terms of just like, being appreciative for him and doing right by him, kind of being honorable and thanking Koo for everything that he's done for the organization, because it has been a lot. I know that Aaron Freeman, I heard him talking about this on Locked On Falcons. Just kind of reiterating how important Koo has been for the Falcons, and it's worth noting, and not like spitting on the guy's demise, spitting on his grave, and just like rooting for his demise. So thank you to Koo, but also thank you to Parker Romo for making all the 5 field goals. They didn't get off to a great start. That first one kind of made it by the skin of his teeth, but I think when he made that 54-yarder, people had a lot more confidence in him. And I got to say, even just the way that the kicks looked, they looked good. They looked powerful, a very high trajectory. Again, thinking about that 54-yarder, a high trajectory, clearing the bar by plenty of distance. It feels like he's got a big leg and an accurate leg, making all those 5 field goals. So a good start for Parker, and we'll hope it continues and hoping it leads to Falcons to more wins. We'll come back to you guys later on this week with more as we gear up for the team's Week 3 game against the Carolina Panthers. A very winnable game, and if the Falcons can get to 2-1, it kind of feels like you're playing with house money going into that Commanders game before the bye. And I think a lot of Falcons fans have felt like if you're 2-2 by the time you get to that bye, then you're kind of on pace with where you want to be. And so that's good. That's good. Not that we're counting that Carolina game as a win yet, because they've certainly have blown their fair share of winnable games in Carolina over the years, especially just a couple years ago. So we'll break down that game down later in the week and more on Joe Patrick on Football. Thank you guys so much for engaging with the podcast. The feedback we get from you guys is amazing. I'm really just personally appreciative of y'all. So thank you guys so much. Again, you can follow me on X at JAPatrick200 or on Instagram, where we just kind of post clips from this show. And we'll talk to you guys next time.